Facebook. And there's the big whistleblower story, and I'll touch on that and get into that. But I think the most important thing about Facebook that's come out in the past couple of weeks is actually this article by Sam Biddle, and it says revealed Facebook's secret blacklist of dangerous individuals and organizations. And we'll just get right into it. This article was published at The Intercept, and anybody who listens to the show knows that sometimes they publish some definitely deep state propaganda. Other times, they allow their journalists to post actual information that was importantly uncovered, and this is one of those cases. And so, this list was initially called the organizations with terrorist or violent history, and it was formed in 2012 in response to Congress and UN pressure, basically saying that Facebook was helping to increase the reach and the platform of violent extremist groups. I think mostly they were thinking of Middle Eastern terrorist groups, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, etc. But since then, it has become the dangerous individuals and organizations, and it's a list of about 4,000 people and groups that include politicians, writers, charities, hospitals, hundreds of music acts, and long dead historical figures. This list is 4,000 names, organizations long, and so it takes a long time. I only had a chance to look through it a little bit. Viewers of the show will know and recognize, they have groups like Houthi and Hezbollah and the IRGC on the list. Any group that they say is tied to the IRGC, it largely seems to resemble, at least in part, a list for U.S. sanctions, and so that may be a part of it as well. Of course, they had, I found, the major Al-Qaeda and ISIS figures on the list, but also names like Abu Zubaydah, which, is somebody who may have had some ties with Al-Qaeda pre 9/11, at the same time has been tortured horrifically at the hands of the United States and held as essentially, indefinite detainee in Guantanamo Bay for the past 15 years, I guess, after being tortured around the world for the first 5. And so, not being able to discuss him and just putting him on this list seems rather disturbing. Now, it's interesting because there was a battle to get the names on this list pre pre-release, a couple of days ago when Sam Biddle put this out. And Facebook didn't want to put it out, and they cited fear that it would put targets on the back of their employees that put together this list. And in some sense, you could definitely see that, like, hey, if you end up on this list, it's gonna hurt your organization's reach, and so there may be some anger. Now, there may be some anger is far different from an actual threat, and according to this article from The Intercept, that Facebook didn't indicate that there was any specific threat, and in fact, the Facebook Oversight Board actually voted in the past to have this list published, and it hasn't been. Honestly, I didn't see anything on the list that was shocking to me, and I think we all knew that this existed, right? We know, me and Will know, that when we do podcasts like the rise and fall of ISIS, that isn't going to get any reach on Facebook because Facebook doesn't allow independent media sources to talk about those topics. And so that's why on Facebook our videos get literally like 2 views when we upload them. It's absolutely unbelievable, and it's just because it's suppressed. If you put, because we write accurate descriptions for our shows where we talk about, hey, we're breaking down like the sanctions on the IRGC. I think we're providing very valuable news content, and yet just the way Facebook works, everything that talks about gets swept up. And there's some interesting analysis on it from somebody who's probably faced a little bit more of the censorship than myself and Will Porter, Rania Khalek, saying that like when she traveled to Iraq, she took a picture of a billboard that had Qasem Soleimani and Al Mohandes, who was the leader of the PMF in Iraq, and Hasha al-Shabi, and a very important figures for Iraqi Shias at the very least, and she just took the picture of the billboard. And I think it was very important as a news reporter, as somebody who commentates on Iraq. I think it's very important to be able to see that and understand that that's how the Iraqi and the Iranian people feel about these people that the U.S. assassinated with a drone. Now, we may think that they're terrible, and whatever accusations may or may not be true. The list of their war crimes is probably far less longer than most U.S. elected officials, but nonetheless, they are probably somewhat bad people. But at the same time, how the Iranian people feel about them is important news, and it's important for the people of the United States to understand. And so I'm very happy when Ronnie Akala takes that picture and posts it, so that I could see the feeling and the sentiment in those countries, and know in part how people are going to react to the United States. But this is the exact kind of thing now being suppressed. This was mostly at least it seemed to me like, and again, I couldn't break it all down. I didn't look. It just, the amount of pages I scrolled through with groups with Arabic, Muslim, Islamic names was very, very, very long, and that may in part be that this list was initially started around these groups, and so now just any of them get swept up, or there's more debate. But there were also a lot of groups that I think, again, I didn't like Google every single one of them, but like the Louisiana Historic Militia or something like that. I guess I don't need a actual like to look up every single one of these groups to know that these are generally targeted groups that Facebook are going to say are like white supremacist or white nationalist extremist or something like that. And so there's a lot of that on the page as well. So I think that's what I have on this. But again, I think it's very important news, and for anybody who covers a lot of foreign policy and who can't get any traction on Facebook, this may be at least a big part of the reason why. Now, there is the Facebook whistleblower, as she's being called in the U.S. mainstream media, Frances Houin, I guess is her last name. I'm probably butchering it. My bad on that. But anyways, she delivered testimony in front of Congress. I read through some of what the mainstream media thought the highlights of her testimony were. This is, the treatment that whistleblowers only like Eric Charamella get, right? This is what happens when you are an official whistleblower, not when you are somebody who's actually telling an interesting story that the people really need to hear. A lot of what she seems to be advocating for is more censorship, complaining that Facebook removed different restrictions and wasn't censoring as much content and stuff like that. And so, I mean, I'm not going to pay too much attention to what she has to say. She already has a verified Twitter account, like, just because she claims to be a Facebook whistleblower. Now, there was this interesting interview with a woman named Sarah in Australia who had formerly worked for Facebook, and she had a pretty interesting story to tell, where she said she was fired. I guess it's not exactly clear what she was fired for. I don't know. But she was fired, and she said it came after she was warning about and wanting to remove and take actions against a bunch of fake accounts. I think were being started last year or in 2019, I forget which, in Azerbaijan by the leadership of that country, to essentially bully and push their propaganda, as they were either ramping up or actually engaged in warfare against Armenia. And so, this is a really important story that she's bringing up. And she also talks about in her just thing how there's certain countries where she feels like when when Western governments identify problems, like with Palestinians. I don't think she used that as an example, but Palestine's one I know where Facebook is very readily willing, if the Israeli government flags something, they take it down. They have a former Israeli minister on their like advisory censorship content board and stuff like that. So there's definitely a lot of bias there. But she lists off all these countries where the U.S. Was unwilling to tamper with the accounts being created, and some of them were like Iraq and Afghanistan, straight up U.S. proxy states. And so all this I think is very important, very interesting, and this is one of the main communication platforms that's been used, and so very, very important news. All right.